there was no internet. There was no apps. There was no online banking. There was no WhatsApp, no Zoom. You were cut off when you came here at the end of 1988. Jack was a guy who threw a lifeline to me in the late 80s. Jack was an American guy, very sweet, but in some ways, someone who was troubled to the core.
Hello there, Internet. Pete here from Thairish Times. What's the story? Right, so today we're going to meet a gentleman named Christopher G. Moore. He's an ex-lawyer and he's probably most well known for his series of Vincent Calvino detective novels. He's also written a lot of non-fiction works and essays for publications around the world. And as you can imagine, after spending 34 years in Thailand, he's got some stories to tell and he's going to share a couple of those with us today. Oh, I nearly forgot, folks, a bit of a channel update. I'm putting together a day in the life series where I follow someone for a day, shadow them and record their full day basically. I've done 2 so far. I'm looking to do some more of those. So if there's anyone in the Bangkok area that's willing to let Pete shadow them for a day, hit me up on thairishtimes@gmail.com. I would really love to film some kind of production, get into a factory and film that process. I think that'd be really interesting, a really good story that would be. So that's just one thing. I mean, I'm open-minded, so whatever ideas you have, send them my way, thairishtimes@gmail.com. I'd also love to film a Muay Thai fighter. I'm a big fight fan. And to tell that story, a Muay Thai fighter's journey, I think that would be really interesting. I'd love to do something like that. I had 2 people lined up and it just fell through. I was quite disappointed. So yeah, let's see, the power of YouTube. Let's see if it can help me. Anyway, let's go meet Christopher. Do me a favor, please like the video if you liked the video, of course. Leave me a comment and share the video. Cheers. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to meet you and do this interview with you.
Pleasure to meet you as well, Pete.
So tell us, what brought you to Thailand and where are you from?
What brought me to Thailand was in the end of 1988, I was going to come back and do research for a book. I'd originally been here in 1983, loved it, but that was like a couple of weeks. So I just scratched the surface. I thought it was enough to see that there was an intriguing culture and enough diversity that would make for a good story. So I came back on a 90-day visa to do research for a book, and then I was going to go back to North America and write the book. At the time that I came here in 88, I was living in New York City most of the time. I was really between New York City and Toronto. I'm a Canadian from the West Coast, and I'd gone to New York when my first novel was published in 1985, His Lordship's Arsenal. And so from that start, I thought, I really would like to look at Asia because my 1983 trip really opened up a whole panorama because I had traveled in Japan, Taiwan, Korea, and Thailand. And I said, I'm going to go back. There's more than one story there to tell.
And then you came to Bangkok then in 1980?
The end of 1988.
1988, so, well, that's a long time.
You know what? It is a long time. And you start to think, how did that happen? It seems like it wasn't a long time. But when I tell people I came here at the end of 88, they go, my God, I wasn't born yet.
I was 1 year old.
You were 1 year old. Okay, there you go.
So tell us, what was life like back in the late 80s and early 90s in Bangkok?
It was an analog culture. If you wanted to read something, it was paper. If you wanted a book, that was basically a bookstore run. There was no Amazon. The books were ones that you could find locally. Telephones, the old rotary telephone system. There was no internet. There was no apps. There was no online banking. There was no WhatsApp, no Zoom. You were cut off when you came here at the end of 1988. And so who was here? Remember, this is pre-digital nomads. Digital nomads fundamentally changed the whole composition of the expat culture here. Before that, you came here, there was not a platform where you could work anywhere in the world. You had to find work in Bangkok, or you didn't work. Or you had a trust fund, which meant you didn't have to work. So it was like one or the other. Or you had a pension, because at that time there were a lot of retired Vietnam vets here on pensions. So there was that kind of segment. But it was a different composition simply because of the nature of the communications and the nature of work. We tend to forget that work is very tightly connected with technology. And the technological revolution has opened up a way of working in one place that allows you to have a global reach. That wasn't the case when I arrived here.
So what about travel in Bangkok? Because now we have the BTS SkyTrain outside here.
Right.
We've got a kilometre down the road, we got the MRT, the subway. Now both of those are like, I consider those to be like the veins of Bangkok, you know. They're fundamental for me getting around. I avoid all the traffic.
Sure.
What was it like back then in the early 90s?
It would have been like Ireland in 1970. People tend to forget that in all the motorcycle taxis, that only came after 1986. There were no motorcycle taxis before that.
Really?
Absolutely. The taxis were all non-metered. And so if you lived here, you knew, because there was an informal agreement. Everyone knew what it would cost to go from Selam Road to Sukhumvit. It was about 40 baht. And so you would just say 40 baht, get in. If they thought you were an outsider and you didn't know what was going on, then 500 baht or some ridiculous amount. So you had to negotiate, you had to know what the price was before you got in.
Well, let's talk about the famous tourism areas. Soy Cowboy, what was that like back in the 90s?
Soy Cowboy was a more remote area. Most of the action was still in the Pat Palm area, in Selam Road. That part of Sukhumvit was just starting to come up. In the late 80s, there were only single shop house bars in Cowboy, and very little neon. And they would tend to be mom and pop run operations. It was before the kind of business entrepreneurial types got a hold of it and saw this as a money-making proposition. That came later.
Tell us about some interesting characters that you've met, because well, I'm going to go straight into it because this one is one that really interested me. You met Oliver Stone, the film writer, film director. What a legend Oliver Stone is. Tell us what happened there.
I met Oliver Stone in the gym of the Grand Sheraton Hotel on Sukhumvit Road. So Oliver Stone was, lifting weights on the bench. I said, you're doing pretty well there, And so we struck up a conversation, and ultimately, I said, would you like to see Soy Cowboy? He said, sure. So I took him on a tour of Soy Cowboy and found out he knew the soy better than I did.
I've heard that before. I heard that he's legendary in Bangkok for knowing certain districts and places. And,
right.
Yeah. There is a lot of kind of sad stories over here. We were going back and forth email, and you mentioned one guy called, I called this story the happy hour guy called Jack. You told me a story about a
Yeah.
lawyer.
My background is law. I was a law professor and I did law. Jack was a guy who threw a lifeline to me in the late 80s. He was working for a law firm here. He said, he said, I understand you're a lawyer. Would you like to do some work? I said, sure, why not? So he gave me a small assignment, basically to draft a letter. I did that, and then one thing led to another, and it became a part-time job. For about 15 years, I was able to do that. And so Jack was there, and Jack was an American guy, very, very sweet, but in some ways, someone who was troubled to the core. And he was a heavy drinker, an alcoholic. And so after work, he would make a beeline to Nana Plaza. He had a favorite bar there, which is an outside bar. And that outside bar had an offer, buy 10 drinks, get one free. And so every night he would go there, throw down the first 10 drinks, and then that 11th free drink would bring a smile. It was like he had won some kind of an award. And I can remember there'd be a couple of nights I would say, after a couple of drinks, I'd say, tell you what, I'll buy you a free drink. He said, it's not the same. I won't have earned it. I need to earn that free drink myself. And so there was that kind of compulsion on behalf of someone to drown out the troubles. Or somehow the troubles would be less if you could make your way to that finish line and get the free drink. You'd won.
You've been here for a long time. Have you adapted to the culture in the country?
It's a good question, but it's a complex answer to a question like that. We talked off camera a little bit about mapping. All of us carry a kind of a cultural map inside of our head of when you turn left, when you turn right, metaphysically, whether it's values, morals, norms, those become automatic as part of what your life is. When you go into another culture, Thailand or any place else, which is a unique culture, you find out sometimes what you think is left is actually right, what is straight ahead is actually reverse. And so you have to pay attention. You have to pay close attention to the local rules, and a lot of those are kind of invisible. You have to kind of learn them as you go along through experience. And part of that comes from understanding the language, the history, the culture, meaning the arts and music, paintings, films, etc. All of which comes as kind of a package. It'll be a little bit like Irish culture. You know, you can go and spend 2 weeks in Dublin and think you know Irish culture. Well, you know certain things about Irish culture, but do you really know the culture deep down the way someone who's raised and born there? Probably not. And it's the same thing here, is that I find that you can adapt to a culture in the sense that you can understand why the reactions are the way they are. But remember, the people who are having those reactions don't go through that process. It's normal. It's natural for them. But for an outsider, it's something that you notice. And you either respect that and deal with that on a level of respect, or you become angry and ultimately you leave. So you have a choice of adaptation means at least a tolerance of other people's viewpoints, their values, the way they think about things. They may not think about them, and they probably don't, the same way you do, but that doesn't lessen the importance to the people who have those thoughts, those beliefs. So there's a huge level. What you learn is not only tolerance, but the level of respect that you're willing to give to others for a way of being that's not necessarily your way.
That's very well put, actually, because the one thing I've noticed, that I always thought the trick for long-term success in living in Thailand was to be open-minded. And for me, I've kept my culture, my identity, because I am proud to be Irish, and I do have my own culture, but I've also had to adapt, and I felt like that worked for me. And I've seen a lot of cases where guys come over to Thailand and they just take their Western mindset, and especially, you know, big cities like New York, London, where everything gets done fast, and they come over here and they really kind of struggle with the pace, because Bangkok's a big city, but it moves differently. And give these guys a year or two and they don't adapt, and they end up leaving. They end up, what I see is people get frustrated, and they get into arguments and fights, and they end up becoming bitter. And it's like this road that some people go down before they actually leave, and then you find out, you go to a bar and you say, where's that guy gone? Oh, he's gone. And I'm like thinking, oh, that's another guy who went down that kind of avenue that didn't adapt.
It takes a certain kind of personality to give other people a space. And what I mean by giving them a space is not convincing them that you're right, but listening to them. We talked off camera about the importance of storytelling, and how in Ireland everyone has a story to tell. And it's going to be true with the Thais as well. The importance of adaptation, the importance of being happy in Thailand, is to listen with a sense of empathy to other people's story, their struggles, their conflicts, how they have coped with lives which may have abandonment or blown up opportunities or other disappointments or frustrations, and how that they deal with them. Because how they deal with them are within a cultural norms so you start to see where the boundaries are. You start to see where the weaknesses are, where the strengths are. And you start to see the humanity in the person you're listening to. Not someone who's just different from you, but won't necessarily have a different kind of reactions because they come from a different background. They have a different mapping in their head.
A couple of sentences here that really piqued my interest. All right, you said in the 90s, at the beginning of your Thailand journey, you borrowed this advice from the great novelist and poet Charles Bukowski. You said, everything you must own must fit inside one suitcase, and then your mind might be free. What's that mean? That was like, I was looking at that sentence and I was like, wow, what's this mean?
I think what it means is we have so many anchors in our life that we carry around. We don't think they're anchors. We think they liberate us when actually they weight us down. Our stuff is very important to our identity and to our status. But when you can strip everything down and just carry it in one suitcase, you're free in a way that people find difficult to understand, because almost no one has that freedom.
Is that what you did when you first came over here?
First came out, I had one suitcase and a laptop.
Was that liberating?
It was liberating because everything was potential then. There was nothing to protect. There was nothing to lose.
Do you remember your first day in Bangkok?
I can remember going from the airport to Wong to the hotel. Yeah, I can remember the first week or two.
And where did you stay when you first got here?
I stayed on a place on Convent Road, off Selam, for a couple of weeks, and then I found a place in Sukhumvit, Soy 27, which was going to be turned into a toothbrush factory. And of all
before you moved
things.
in?
Before I moved in.
Okay.
They couldn't rent it. Basically because it was one of the first apartments built in Sukhumvit. So it was probably back from the 1960s. And they were huge 2-bedroom places. So I see the notice on the Foreign Correspondence Club board. You know, there are only 4 units in this place. They're having trouble renting it. They're going to turn it into a toothbrush factory unless someone wants to rent. I take a bus, go straight there. Walking down Soy 27, I see a sign, "See, I'm Canadian." I thought, well, I'm a Canadian, I'm going to stop in. And there's a young Canadian sitting there, white shirt, tie, playing chess against himself. So it didn't look like he was very busy, and he wasn't that busy in those days. I mean, now he's one of the most successful businessmen in Thailand. But in any event, during that time, I said, there is a place for rent somewhere around here. He said, "Let me take you." So Jim walked me all the way down the end of the Soy, and which then was not fully paved, through the soy dogs to this old building. I thought, yeah, I could see where this would be a toothbrush factory. Go inside, and the rent was like 4,000 baht a month. And I said, I'll take it. Big 2-bedroom place. Yeah, it's a slum, but still, it was okay. And I was in that place from 1989 and finally left that complex in 2005.
Wow.
And my rent had gone up from 4,000 to 4,500. Now, the irony of this is that the landlord was ethnic Indian, lived in Vancouver.
Ah, so you had that connection.
So it was actually her, I never met her, but it was her brother. So for 20 years, basically, it was like living rent-free, 4,000 baht a month, which meant I could actually have the freedom to write, to explore, to investigate where I was.
So we have before us a table full of books.
Yes.
What's going on here?
Well, what's going on is a small part of the books that I've written over the years. And I've done 27 novels and then 10 other books, nonfiction or anthologies, of which I was the editor and also contributed to the anthology.
So tell us about Vincent Calvino. Who is he? What's he all about?
Vincent Calvino is Brooklyn born, half Jewish, half Italian, whose best friend was a Thai in New York City. And so in helping a friend, he ends up involved with some very nasty people, mafia type people, ends up getting disbarred through some corrupt acts on the part of that mafia. And his friend invites him to Thailand. So Vincent needs something to do. He's an ex-lawyer now, so he decides to go into the investigation business, and the specialty is finding missing people.
And did you base this character off people that you met over here? Because there's so many interesting characters in Bangkok.
Yeah. Almost all of the characters I've created were inspired by people I've met along the way. As I said, I was in New York City for about 4 years, and I spent time writing with the NYPD as a civilian observer. So I got tight with these guys in the 68th precinct in Brooklyn and saw lots of different crime scenes going into situations. The first time I was ever shot at was in Brooklyn with the police.
What was that like? What happened there?
It was one night, it was on patrol. It was about 11 o'clock at night. And we're in a patrol car. I'm in the back seat. The two police are in front. And another car comes, headlight to headlight with our car, stops. And it happened to be two other police, but they were plain clothes. One was a woman, one's a guy. They get out of the car, we get out of the car, and someone from a high-rise takes a shot, a couple of shots, boom, boom. And so everyone dives underneath the car, and no one was hit, but it made the heart race.
So any future plans? What's going on for Christopher G. Moore?
Now?
Yeah, into the future. You've got some big stuff coming up with you and Bangkok Pat.
Bangkok Pat, wonderful personality, talented, creative, wise, tolerant, technically capable. This is one of these people who suddenly enters into your life. We decided to do originally a documentary about Vincent Calvino, the private eye from New York, who has appeared in 17 of my novels. And ultimately it evolved as these things. The best creative projects are like that. You start with one idea and then you allow that to evolve in a way that creative people are able to shape and determine a new form. We created, in a sense, a new form. It's film, video, documentary, and fiction. And we've put that together in a 30-minute video. I wrote the script, and it's Calvino talking about a missing person case from the 1990s. And putting together the changes of the 1990s, of how he couldn't find that person in the 1990s to the current day. So 30 years later, he goes back to what is now a cold case to find the missing girl. And so it is a journey from the past into the present, looking for someone who was lost 30 years ago.
Sounds very interesting. And you picked a really good guy to work with there with Bangkok. Pat, his knowledge on Bangkok is exceptional.
He has exceptional knowledge on Bangkok. Of all the people I've met, I would rank him certainly in the top 5 of people who really know the city.
Christopher, thank you very much. Pleasure. Absolute pleasure.
I hope you got something you can work with.
Oh, beautiful stuff that was. Beautiful. Thank you very much. So folks, if you enjoyed that, hit that like button, share the video, share it widely, and leave us a comment. I'm always interested to hear what you have to say. So thanks very much, and we'll see you on the next one.